We found stories that had insane levels of proof, and we went in as Christians that believe miracles were possible, but kind of saying, prove it to us.
Today's guest is a good friend of mine, Billy Hallowell, a journalist and author who's been shining a light in dark places for years. Whether he's writing about spiritual warfare or challenging media narratives, Billy's got a unique gift for helping believers discern the times we're living in. Billy Hallowell, good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you.
So we've obviously known each other for a long time, and honestly, I probably should say this right at the start. You were instrumental for me when I wrote my first book, Good God. One of my first interviews that I landed was this guy named Billy Hallowell on The Blaze, and it was at the National Religious Broadcasters, and I show up, and I thought that I had, made it big time.
You were, ready to go. You showed up peppy, I remember you popped in there, and I was like, oh, this guy's got a lot of energy.
Yeah, this is 10 years ago, and it was awesome. We had a great interview. We hit it off. We've been friends ever since. But you made a lot of connections for me early on, which I greatly appreciate. And very excited to have you on the show, introduce you here to our audience here at Strong Church. And so I want to talk a little bit. You have been a mainstay in Christian media, and for people that consume things like CBN, things like FaithWire, all the stories where you see, Denzel Washington talking about his faith, or, some actor in Hollywood that had, some sort of faith encounter, as well as a lot of other, stories covering everything from Christian persecution to religious freedom. If people don't read who those articles are by, they might have missed your name. How many articles do you think you've written in your Christian journalistic career here?
Oh, man. I tried to count at one point. So I know it's over 15,000. I'm confident that it's over 15,000. Yes. Because when I left The Blaze, it was at about 10 there, and that was in 2016. Wow. So it's at least 15,000.
And this is before AI. You're actually writing these things yourself.
I have never used AI. I'm going to say this on the record, to write an article ever, and I never will. But yes, it's before AI. I wrote them myself, and some of them are longer, some of them are shorter, but it's crazy. It's crazy to think that there's that many pieces out there.
Yeah. So, a lot of our audience, strong believers, they're obviously following a lot of what we do here at TPUSA Faith. And, we have a lot of pastors that watch this as well. When you were, moving into a place of towards a career, how did you get your start? I know there's kind of an interesting story that you have here of kind of how you broke into Christian media, for lack of a better term.
It's one of the weirdest. It's a really weird story in that I was 15 years old. I'll never forget. I was homesick, had the TV on, the news was on, and it was April 20th, 1999. It was the day of the Columbine shooting. And I'd always paid attention to the media. I loved the media. I liked Hollywood. I was really interested in that. But I remember watching the visions of kids just sort of running out of the school.
Yeah.
These horrific images that were coming across the screen. And it had a really deep impact on me. And I was like, I want to do something, 15-year-old, to stop this from ever happening again, which obviously we haven't been able to do.
And for our younger audience, Columbine was really the first one at a national level of a mass shooting at a school. It was a shift, much like 9/11 was.
Yes.
And what 9/11 did to the airline industry, this did to education. There was a drastic change after Columbine.
People were horrified. It was how could this happen in a high school? How could this happen in a public school? And so it had that effect on me. Long story short, I was like, I'm going to start a talk show, which is a ridiculous idea. At 15. And so I started meeting with producers, real producers, and they were just interested in the fact that this kid was trying to do something. It wasn't going to happen. We didn't have money for a show, but they kept encouraging me hey, go create a website because the internet's this new thing, go do it. And so I created this website, Teen Web Online, which I laugh now because I thought it was the coolest name at the time. But the website was aimed at trying to kind of deal with these issues, right? Of violence, of other issues too. And I was a Christian. I grew up in a Christian home. So I was motivated by my faith. But that website actually became a very real thing. We were interviewing people, we were providing resources, and by the time I was 18, I had a column, I was writing, I was speaking, I was starting to travel around. And so it actually became a very real baseline. Then I went to school for journalism, and by that point I had a career already kind of going on at the same time. So it was this really weird dynamic. And then I started doing Fox News, and it just kind of fed into everything, and I never stopped.
Yeah. You've written multiple books as well. Talk to us about a couple of those.
Yeah, so I like to tackle topics kind of like you do, topics that are difficult, right? And for me, it's kind of things that people debate in the church, like the end times. I wrote a book called Armageddon Code. What do Christians believe about the end times? How do we make sense
from a journalistic kind of level, looking at the different views that people hold to?
Same thing with evil, playing with fire. I kind of looked at the demonic realm. Like, what do Christians believe? What's the debate? Like, what do Catholics believe versus Protestants and all that? And then I had a book, Fault Line, which actually is interesting now because it was 2016 that I wrote that. And a lot of the stuff, it was about Hollywood, media, universities, how, the secular left has sort of dominated all that and how it's impacted culture. Mm-hmm. And now I look at it and I'm like, I couldn't have even guessed how wild it was going to get within a decade, right? So that's just some of the topics I like to tackle.
When you look at not just the statistical side of this, but when you look at the media side of how Christianity is being talked about, what's your level of optimism right now that you're feeling about where we're headed here in 2025?
I think we're headed in a really good direction. And I think this is one of those situations where it's like the boy who cried wolf, right? The media for so long going after Christians, misrepresenting Christians. And some of it isn't even intentional. And I think we assume like, oh, the media are just out to get us. And it's like, well, there's a degree of that. But for most of these journalists, they go to school, they're taught to be sort of progressive or left. Then outside of that, they move to cities that are big cities where they're only around people who think the way they do. So they think they're middle of the road. In journalism school, I was taught you don't have an opinion. Nobody has an opinion. You can just you can be white as snow. It doesn't matter. And that's not reality. We all have opinions. But if we think we don't, that's when it gets dangerous. So the media did this to themselves because for so long, lying, misrepresenting. And so what you have is, I think, on a lot of issues, not just, representing Christians, people have been lied to and they're realizing that. So on the gender issue, go down the line. That's why you're seeing politics mirror faith right now, right? Yeah. There's a lot of people recognizing, especially young people, I've been lied to for a really long time and I need to figure out what the truth is. And Hollywood too. Like Hollywood's done the same thing. They've done this to themselves. Disney has done it to themselves. So I think the cool thing is that we're having a real moment. The question is the church ready for that moment, right? And that's a big question.
So one of the things we hear a lot about is that, you hear kind of the mainstream media, and obviously, I think rightfully so, a lot of these outlets have been vilified for just their outlandish coverage and very biased coverage that you're kind of alluding to. How do you feel that the makeup is of, let's call it the press pool of Christendom within the U.S.? Like, what percentage of these guys are real believers that care about the gospel and are following the Lord versus it's just a career for them, or maybe they have a bias or a slant?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard to answer too, because I think you have this reality of there may be people who really believe they're following the right way, doing the right thing, and in their personal lives are Christians. But guess what? You want clicks. You want people to open, emails. So in wanting that, you're going to bend the rules sometimes. You're going to take money. Here's the problem with taking money in media. When you take money from somebody, and look, this is why advertising teams need to be very separate without getting into the weeds from the editorial team, because you start to say, well, I can't, if I like criticize that company or if I say something about them, even when I should,
right,
they're not going to sponsor me anymore. Pfizer's not going to sponsor me anymore if I ask any questions about the vaccine. So this becomes a real issue. So it's hard to put a percentage on it, but here's the thing. I think everything you're reading, and this is kind of sad, even in the Christian world, like who wrote it? Why did they write it? Who is that person? What worldview are they coming from? You have to vet every single thing, even in the Christian world that you're reading.
So let's talk about your, process, particularly. How have you really, found a way to choose integrity throughout your career? 15,000 plus articles, that's a lot. What's been your process in navigating that?
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. If we're Christians, we have to be called to the truth. And I have not been perfect. None of us are perfect, right? And I've learned a lot throughout the years of how to do this. But that might mean that you have to tell the truth about something that's uncomfortable, right? If you have a controversy, for instance, you have to cover it the right way. You can't hide details just because you like the person or just, So there are times you may even say, that's not the story for me. Somebody else needs to cover that one. I may be too close to that person. Mm-hmm. And that happens. We know that. We have mutual friends, right? Yeah. There's people I'm not going to cover. But I'm constantly making sure that, hey, I want to stand by the truth. And if we get something wrong, which is rare, we want to correct it, right? Because if you're a Christian and you're out there saying you stand by the truth and people see that you're shielding something or covering it, well, then you can't say that you're being a good Christian and doing what you're called to do. So for me, it's really verifying, vetting, calling. I ask a lot of questions. I want to understand what is in front of me and what is actually happening. And that can take you to some uncomfortable places sometimes that you have to be open about and candid about.
I want to talk about specifically, you have a new project that's coming out, and I think that this is an important project. I had the opportunity to watch this. It's a brand new documentary. Remind me the title of this again.
Investigating the Supernatural Miracles.
And this is potentially the start of some ongoing content that you're putting out there. This is in partnership with CBN is the outlet that produced this. And I think that this is a very interesting topic. I know you've had opportunity. We talked about this the first time that you and I met. You've had multiple stories throughout your career that have been kind of these miraculous stories that just as a journalist that you've covered and you've seen, whether it be reports of healing or I know you mentioned you've done some work on kind of the angel demon topic as well. What I found interesting on the show is it's not mega church pastors that you're interviewing. It's not TV faith healers that you're interviewing. It's medical doctors. It's theologians. Other journalists that are covering these stories. So talk about maybe how did this project come about and your role in it.
Yeah, we were feeling like, hey, a lot of these topics are not being covered well, and nobody's really providing evidence, right? And right now, because people are searching, I think it's an interesting time. Like all these young people are searching, they're going to want some evidence of what faith looks like, right? They did the altar call, they accepted Christ. What does faith look like in practice? And so we started talking about heaven and hell, angels and demons, miracles, and we wanted to do a TV show. We're going to do a 3-part, 30-minute TV show. And, God laughs at our plans sometimes because we go out in the field and we start filming the miracle show after CBN greenlit the series.
Yeah.
And we get into a couple interviews and we're like, there's no way to tell miracle stories in 30 minutes. Like if you're going to do this, it has to be a film series. And so it quickly evolved into a film series. And this is the first of those films. And, we went around America, like vetting these stories, and we found stories that had insane levels of proof. And we went in as Christians that believe miracles were possible, but kind of saying, prove it to us.
There was a stat at the start of the film about the number of people that have claimed to have experienced miracles. And the stat comes out, if I remember right, it's basically that there's potentially up to 100 million miracles that people have claimed have happened in the United States alone. And the one of the points you guys make in the documentary was that even if 99% of those are wrong, and it's not real, or they were deceived or misled, or whatever, wishful thinking, psychosomatic, whatever that is, that still means that there's a lot of miracles that have taken place in this. And I know as a pastor, we have church history on the side of the miraculous. I mean, you see this in early church fathers, but I know on a personal level, I think that this is something that is very important for the church to take a serious look at. And you guys have done a great job, I think, of presenting this in more of a academic, journalistic, sort of way.
Can I say something? Okay, so if it is true that miracles are still happening, and if we do not engage in that, and we tell people they're not still happening, how many people, and this is going to sound radical maybe, are dying, not getting healed, seeing their lives end early, and suffering because, if it's true, hypothetically, because we're not actually engaging in that, and we're refusing to. That is insane to me to think about, and very convicting and a little terrifying.
Yeah, one of the stories along those lines in the documentary that stood out to me was the cardiologist in Palm Beach,
Dr. Crandall.
And you guys did such a good job building the story. His son, I think it was leukemia, and I'm waiting for that story to have his son healed. Yeah. And, he's telling through the story, and you're just waiting for that turn, and just like, here's the miracle. And then, they talk about the son passing. I'm waiting for it to be, and he rose from the dead,
Because then he prays over his body.
He prays over his body. And, the story there is that his son dies. But this birthed a commitment in him and a passion that he was going to believe God more as a physician and pray for his patients more. And then it's not too long after that they have a patient who's coded, who died of a heart attack in the hospital. He was the overseeing physician for for calling his death, and he'd been no pulse for 40 plus minutes or something like that.
This man was dead for 40 minutes. Jeff Markin, 40 minutes. They're sending him to the morgue. Like, they're done now. They're
cleaning up the body, getting it ready to send to the morgue.
Crandall's walking out, and I think this story is wild because of what you just described with his son. He's walking out, and he feels God say to him, go back and pray for that man. And of course, he's ignoring God because he's like, that's nuts. Like, I can't do that. There's no point. He's dead. He feels it again. Go back and pray for that man. He walks back into the room, and of course, they're looking at him. The nurse is like, this man is nuts, right?
Yeah.
He starts praying over the body and praying, if he didn't know you, Lord, help him to, And he says to them, shock him one more time. And they're thinking, well, they didn't just think it. They said, if we shock him, A, we're not going to get a pulse. We already tried. But B, if we do, he'll be in a vegetative state after because he's been dead for 40 minutes. They shock him. They immediately get a heartbeat back, a perfect heartbeat. And within 2 days, he wakes up, Jeff Markin, and is completely fine. Now, I won't get into this now, but he has a near-death experience too in the midst of this.
Yeah.
But we interviewed this man. So like when I went into
you
this,
sat down with the man. Yes.
with him.
Yeah.
When we went to go film that, I was very skeptical. I'm like, okay, this guy was dead for 40 minutes, right? But again, all documented. We have all the records. It's a wild story.
If you're like most churches today, giving isn't just happening in the offering plate anymore. It's happening online, in apps, and even at kiosks in the lobby. And that's where Secure Give comes in. They've been a trusted partner to ministries for nearly 2 decades, helping churches of every size simplify and strengthen their giving experience. Whether you're a small church plant just getting started or a growing church looking for a better solution, Secure Give has the tools you need. They make it easy for people to give faithfully and securely anytime, anywhere. So if you're ready to level up your digital giving, head to securegive.com/turningpoint. And don't forget to use promo code TurningPoint to get your first month completely free. Again, that's securegive.com/turningpoint.
What do you think the message is for, pastors out there? How do we take this and, contextualize this to to our and again, we're not necessarily even talking about faith healers. It's just, is God intervening in our reality? Do prayers get answered? Is the miraculous happening? How do we contextualize that to, you think, the church in America?
Yeah, I think we have to ask the question, is it happening? And then if we're not sure, we have to explore it. And that's what this was. It was very much, let's go and look at this. These are compelling cases. And I think whether you're a Christian who believes in miracles, a Christian who isn't sure you think they're happening or you think they're not anymore, or an atheist or an agnostic, there's something here for you to challenge you, right? Or to build your faith up if you're in the first group. But there's so many different elements of this. We have to look at it because it does matter. I think the answer to this actually matters more than we maybe want to admit. And it's not a salvation issue per se, but it is an issue of what do we believe about God and where do we see that this ended? If this did end, where's the line that delineates that? I know there's debate about this, but I had a hard time finding that line. And I found myself, as I was going through the story, saying, look, I came in here skeptically as a Christian, and I'm leaving feeling very convicted that maybe I missed something in my own faith walk. Maybe we are missing something. And if we are, how important is that for us to kind of recapture that? And so my hope is we process that and think about that collectively, but also individually.
One of the reasons this stood out to me is, I covered in my book, Woke Jesus, when you see the kind of infiltration of progressivism in the church, one of the first areas that affected was a diminished belief in the miraculous. And so, and ultimately, the most miraculous thing that we believe in as Christians aren't the miracle stories and some guy in a hospital getting raised from the dead. It's the resurrection of Jesus Christ, right? That's the miracle that all of Christianity hinges on. I think that there's a lot of importance here as we talk about, how do we stay a strong church? I think one of the ways we stay a strong church is believing in a strong God, right? That we don't diminish what God can do. And there might be, again, there's plenty of different theological, room that you have within there on kind of how you believe about gifts of the Holy Spirit and all these sorts of things. I have very strong opinions about these things. But I think that one thing that is a primary doctrine for Christians is a belief in a powerful, strong God. We see actually Paul warning to Timothy that there's going to come a day where there's going to have churches have a form of godliness but deny his power. And so I think that what you guys are working on is really, remarkable in that sense as well.
One other thing about this, in light of what you just said, none of these people, and this did not strike me until we finished the project and we were looking at it, and I'm like, none of them got a miracle on the first try. They fought 10 years. I mean, one guy was paralyzed for 10 years in excruciating pain. And that opens up a lot of other theological questions. What was going on during that time? What is God teaching you through your suffering? But none of them got immediate healing. It was all a journey of prayer meeting after prayer meeting, to the point where one of the guys who was paralyzed, he told his wife, I don't want to be prayed over anymore. I don't want anybody touching me. He was done. And she was like, let's go to one more meeting, one more. And that was the meeting where he got healing, where his hand opened up for the first time, where he got out of his brace and was able to walk.
Wow.
And so there's a lot there. Not that you can't get a healing on the first try, but maybe you won't get the healing on this side of eternity, right? And we dealt with that, as you said. So.
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about the other day was, Hebrews chapter 11, where we see this faith hall of fame, and you have all these different figures throughout, Hebrews 11 that see this just miraculous move of God and they experience the thing in which they were believing for. And then you get to the end of the chapter. And I think this is the balance that is lost a lot of times in the church, that I think that people criticize some of the, more miracle-focused aspects to Christianity. So it has all these people that received what was promised, and then it says others were tortured, they were sawn in half, they lost sons and daughters, they went about destitute and broken, and then eventually at the end of the chapter it says, but together with us they were made perfect, basically meaning that those who received the manifestation and those that didn't receive the manifestation, the thing that they had in common was they trusted God and they believed him. And I think that is the biggest takeaway that we can get. If we make it just about chasing a miracle and not about chasing God, it's easy to get out of focus with that. So
well, that's the whole thing. It's about trust, right? We're called to radical trust in God, and no matter what happens, right? Of course you want the miracle. You should fight for it till the very end, right? But you have to trust that no matter what happens, God's got your back and he's got you, And so I think that for me, that transformed a lot of the way I think about my own faith and how hard I would actually fight. I think I would have given up. I mean, at some point I would be like, all right, God, I'm done. But I think now if I were terminally ill, I would fight that fight till the end with that hope and that trust. Those are two things that can be in tension, but you can hold them together, and we need to.
Yeah. I want to talk just a few minutes here about, kind of where you feel like one of our themes this year is really our theme that's guiding TPUSA Faith this year is faith forward. And so we're very interested in kind of where do we move from here. I know that, historically, and I think you'll be okay with me saying this, you were more reserved about maybe, Trump's first term and kind of where that was going. You were kind of looking for some receipts there. I since have seen you be a lot more excited about where the nation's going and have seen some delivery on some things with this administration. From a faith standpoint, when you look at kind of how we're moving forward as a nation with that intersection of kind of faith and politics or faith and culture, what sort of things are you, looking for, and what are some of the markers that you think we need to be watching?
Well, we want to see a situation where whoever's in power is opening doors for opportunity for people to find faith. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. Faith comes first, right? And the interesting thing, and I think it's funny how God works, that somebody like a Donald Trump, who people will say, he's imperfect, he's this, he's that. Well, what you have is a scenario where there's a person opening the door to a scenario where people have those opportunities more, right? Where young people are asking these questions because of the things that have happened, that he's defending biological gender, right? Who cares? You can debate all day what you think about why he's doing that. It doesn't matter. He's doing it. The alternative is that there'd be somebody not doing that and in fact legislating things that are actually dangerous for people to believe and think and live out. And so that has been a shift for me in seeing, okay, there are priorities here that I think line up. I think for us, the focus needs to be keeping it on faith, right? Politics matters. We can be engaged. We should be. I love politics. You do. We all do, right? That can't be our number one. Our number one is faith, and the politics can be an avenue to kind of get us there, to allow people to see the hope and the truth. And I think for me, watching what's happening right now, I mean, the fruit is there. You're seeing it. Like, why are people reacting in this way? Because I think we've called out a lot of things, both politically, culturally, socially, that don't make sense. And we need to keep calling those things out and not just stopping there, pointing people to the solution of it. So,
if people want to find out more about you in particular or get one of your books, where do they go?
They can go to billyhallowell.com. And I've been telling people, share your miracle stories. Like, I keep saying this in interviews, like, go to my website, go to the contact form, send it to me. I'm getting tons of crazy stories from all over the country, and I'd love to hear more of them.
Okay. No, love it. Love it. I was thinking here as we wrap about an interview that we did together years ago at the National Religious Broadcasters. And I think it was on like Friday of the event, the very last day. And they were literally taking down like the walls around us and all the banners around us. So I'm glad that we made it through an interview without anybody tearing down the set.
In a much more beautiful set than we had that day. So I love it.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's great having you here. And thank you all for watching Strong Church here at TPUSA Faith. Look, we know that there's a lot of pressures out there that people are facing around this country. And I think that it is so important than ever that we have a church that is strong and that is really being brave and bold in today's society. So thank you so much for watching.